Hello friends! So for today's video, I thought it might be helpful to show you guys just some basic stitches for hand sewing that can be used for garment construction. At the end, I also wanted to share just a few sort of tips for more professional looking garments. I am by no means an expert, and I will link additional resources down below. They're resources that I am still learning from and that I am still practicing and honing my skills to get better at this whole sewing thing because it's really hard. So today I just wanted to provide you with some basics of how I construct garments when I do, and also, if you saw my blog post, these are the techniques that I used when refashioning that black dress. So without further ado, let's get to stitching. One of the most important stitches for garment construction is called the backstitch. So to do the backstitch, after you started your thread in your preferred method, I just used a knot here, what you want to do is come up through the wrong side of the fabric, and then you want to go back to where you came down to the wrong side of the fabric. And then you want to go up, equal space, and then down in the last place that you came up. So once more, you want to come up in equal space to make your stitch, and then back to your last stitch. And this is what the back stitch looks like on the right side of the fabric, and this is what the back stitch looks like on the wrong side of the fabric. So you can sort of see on the wrong side these overlaps. Now the backstitch is really important in garment construction because it makes a very strong seam. So it's useful for seams that need to take a lot of strain, like a waist seam, for instance, or anything where there's going to be pulling on that seam. A backstitch is a really good option. Now the next stitch is called the running stitch. And for the running stitch, what you're going to want to do is go through your fabric and then back up to create this little fold. And then through and up and through and up in sort of even spaces to create these sort of folds. And then you push your needle through all of those stitches. Mine got caught on my fabric, it's okay. And you pull through, and it creates something like this. Mine got a little bit crooked, but that's okay. And the running stitch is really good for seams that don't need as strong a finish as the backstitch. So skirt seams where they aren't going to be taking strain, so probably away from the waist. Or you can do really wide running stitches, which is called basting, and that's when you need a temporary hold with two fabrics. So you can baste things together, then sew them with, say, a back stitch if you need more strength, and then clip out those long basting stitches and have your strong seam. And that just sort of helps keep things together and aligned while you're trying to sew other things. Now, if you have a seam that doesn't need the strength of a back stitch, but needs a little more strength than a running stitch, you can do something called the running back stitch. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with football. So, just like with the running stitch, we make our little folds. But then, after you've pulled through, you can do a backstitch. So just like we did before, go back. And then back up. Now, if you want this to be sort of imperceptible from the right side of your fabric, you could always do what's called a spaced backstitch, which is just like the backstitch, but you don't go all the way back to where you started. So just, except my thread got caught. There we go. So just like that, so it creates this sort of little space. And so when you use the running stitch and the back stitch together, it creates a seam that's stronger than the running stitch, but not quite as strong as the back stitch. Now, the last stitch that I used in my reconstruction of the black dress, like I talk about in my blog post, is called the whip stitch. Now, for the whip stitch, what you're going to be doing is sort of going around the edge of your fabric. So you're always going to be pushing in from the same side. So you can see that loop, rather than being on top of our fabric like this, it ends up around the edge of the fabric. Like so. Now, if you do your whip stitch very close together, this is one option for finishing a raw edge, is to just do a very tight whip stitch along the edge of it. And there's a method you can use called felling, which is a special type of whip stitch that is invisible from the outside if you're finishing a seam on the inside of your garment. And that is all the stitches for today. Hello again. So I hope you find those stitches useful, and now I just want to share a few tips for how to make your garments look better. So my absolute #1 tip for doing this is press your seams. I know everyone says this, but really do it. It helps neaten things up so much. So always press your seams, and after you've pressed them, then finish your seams. And also with seam pressing, there are particular directions that you should press your seams. I won't get into it here because that could be a whole separate video, but I will put a link down below to Evelyn Wood, who went over this in detail and talks about how you should do that. So, #1, press and finish your seams. #2 is don't be afraid to make a mock-up. If this is your first time using a pattern, if it's complicated, make a mock-up and then you can fit that, and then your final garment will look so much better. Now, if you don't know what a mock-up is, it is sort of a trial run for a pattern. It's usually made out of some sort of cheap fabric. It should be a fabric that's at least somewhat similar to what you want to make your final garment out of, unless of course you just foresee some really major pattern and fit issues, in which case just use the cheapest stuff you can find that's reasonably lightweight so it's quick to sew up and fix. And what this does is it means that you can fit it to you and how your body is. None of us are symmetrical, and patterns are usually symmetrical. So what that means is you can pinch in where something is too wide, you can know, oh, I need to extend this area to fit how my body is, and it just makes the whole thing work better for you. So those are my sort of top 2 major things that help with things looking better. And I guess my last one has to do with ironing again. I know, so exciting. But really, before you finish your garment, or once you think you're done, just give it a good iron, a good press, just to finish it out and make it look nice. This is particularly important when working with something like cotton or linen that really loves to wrinkle. It just finishes the whole thing, and then you can hang it up in your closet and it will stay nice. So I think that's all I have for today, but those 3 tips should get you so far in making your sewing look nicer. And yeah, I think that's it for me today. You can follow me on Instagram, and I also, as I mentioned earlier, have a blog. Both of those are linked on my channel as well as down below, where you can also find those resources that I talked about in the beginning. So I hope you have a nice day and happy sewing!